Hey, don't attack me. I'm just the messenger.
Hi, this is JT. Lady C and I would like to thank everyone for your support, especially your feedback, your emails, your posts, your comments. We appreciate all of it. What we like to do is look at an interesting thing today, and that is, why do people oftentimes attack the messenger as opposed to attacking the message?
You're listening to The Critical Thought, where we challenge our listeners to use critical thinking when examining the teachings of Jehovah's Witnesses.
You know, one of the things that you will often notice is that when people put up forums, different websites and so forth, they open it up to people to comment. And what you will often find is a very interesting development, and that is people will comment, especially when it's visited by Jehovah's Witnesses or Jehovah's Witness supporters. They will often listen to the video and then they want to participate. So they'll oftentimes will set up a bogus website or a bogus account so that they can participate. But it's very interesting if you notice what often happens, and you'll see it, you see it very, very frequently. So instead of actually addressing the subject or the issue, what they will do is they will literally attack the messenger. They will attack the person who is making the comments. And so some people, when they see that, they'll respond back negatively, this and that. I tell people the internet is a wonderful tool if you use it and use it correctly. When a Jehovah's Witness, of course, we know they're not supposed to be here, but we need to take full advantage of the fact that they volunteered to be here in violation of their own teachings. So since they're here, we might as well take advantage and let people see this is what you will be doing if you become one of Jehovah's Witnesses. And so we went back and looked through some of our videos. I'll give you a perfect example. We did a video on why we left the Jehovah's Witness religion. And what we did, we focused on three specific, very specific teachings of Jehovah's Witnesses. One dealt with the generation of 1914 that would not die. The other dealt with the alternative service, which affected people in terms of military service, and the teaching on the sheep and the goat. And it was very interesting when you went back and read what some of the comments were by Jehovah's Witnesses. And we thought it was, Lady C and I, we thought it would be interesting to share with you what some of the comments have been from people when they actually sit down, listen to what we're talking about, and how they respond back.
We had this one guy, Leroy Rogers, and he was just totally obnoxious. He referred to JT as being a weak chump. He said,
"You're the lamest, weakest chump I've ever seen. Get a life, nerd."
And then this guy named Brian Burns, he had some negative comments to say, and he said,
"You are gutless. You served in Bethel? I don't think so."
Another individual that had been posting comments on our website goes by the name of Guardian of Doctrine, and he was on our page, was actually fighting with another person that was on there providing comments as well, and he basically said,
"Go hang yourself, Satan."
We also had an individual that was posting under the name of online witnessing. And he said that critical thinking originates from Satan. Did you remember what Satan said to Eve? He asks.
Now he even mentions that Eve, she got into trouble because she was an independent thinker. She was a critical thinker. In fact, as you can see right here, he said that critical thinking comes from Satan the devil. Now, this is why people who are not Jehovah's Witnesses need to see how a Jehovah's Witness thinks and reasons. As a Jehovah's Witness, we were always taught that independent or critical thinking meant we were not accepting what God wanted us to do. Well, interestingly, we're not discussing what God says to do. We're discussing what the Watchtower writers have said. And yet in his mind, he is thinking, well, that's what God said. If the Watchtower said it, that's what God said. That's what it means. And it's only when people sit back and look at what people say do you see that critical thinking as a Jehovah's Witness is something that is simply so discouraged that people don't even know when to use it. I mentioned before, I remember asking a fellow elder, what is critical thinking? And his response was, critical thinking is when you're trying to criticize the society. And I said to myself, this is amazing. This is absolutely amazing.
And then in another post, he went on to say,
Please do not compliment me. I am not an independent thinker.
Now, can you believe that? This person publicly acknowledged, he said, what? I am not a critical thinker. Now, how in the world can you talk to somebody who they're actually proud? I'm not a critical thinker. I just do what I'm told. See, this is why I tell people, this is why we need Jehovah's Witnesses posted, because we can't make this stuff up. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. Can you imagine if he went to his job and he told his boss, I'm not a critical thinker. He's sitting on a job interview, right? And they ask him, well, tell somebody, well, I'm not a critical thinker. They'll be like, we don't want you working for us. So this is the way we think as Jehovah's Witnesses. Now, the actual reason he said, I am not a critical thinker, is because he actually equates not accepting the published explanation of the Watchtower writers with rejecting God. And that is amazing how these people, and you and I, and we all did it, we equated whatever the Watchtower said, then God had said it. And so a person who is a Jehovah's Witness, he considers independent thinking, because if you read all the articles that the society has done on independent thinking, it's always in the context of thinking independently of what God says.
and another guy, Keith Lawson.
ExJW, now that you are in the world, do you not feel anguish at your separation from God and angst and misery at your closeness to Satan? I urge you, shrug off your demonic influence and return to the truth.
And so now, does this sound like someone who is using critical thinking? And see, that's what our forum is all about. We want people to think critically. We want people to take information, look at it, and analyze it. But when you make comments about people such as personal attacks like this, what this says, I mean, it literally shouts, just like the publication says, that you have a closed mind. It says, I cannot defend this stuff.
In 1984, the Society published a series of articles in the Awake magazine. In Open or Closed Mind, which do you have? 6 benefits from an open mind. And an open mind wins God's approval. In the November 22nd, 1984 Awake magazine, note what it has to say under the subheading, Why People Have Closed Minds. If we are unable to defend our religious views, we may find ourselves lashing out against those who challenge our beliefs, not with logical arguments, but with slurs and innuendos. This smacks of prejudice and of a closed mind. And also note what the May 22nd, 1990 Awake magazine has to say under the subheading, Attacking the Person. This type of fallacy attempts to disprove or discredit a perfectly valid argument or statement by making an irrelevant attack on the person presenting it. A similar tactic is to attack the person with a subtle dose of innuendo. But while personal attacks, subtle and not so subtle, may intimidate and persuade, never do they disprove what has been said. So be alert to this fallacy.
And so I think it's so important. I tell Lady C all the time, it is absolutely crucial. And this is the whole thing behind what we're doing. A person who's a Jehovah's Witness, who does not have a critical thinking mind, an open mind, someone who is willing to examine things, as they say, let the chips fall where they may. If that person is not like that, you can show them all the proofs, facts, documentation, whatever you want to. It will never change their mind. But you see, the internet is fascinating because it goes out to a lot of people. You see, there are people who have simply not bought into just because the society says it or just because the Watchtower says it, it must be true. And so these are people who many times are studying with Jehovah's Witnesses and they want to know. And so what we are doing is we're giving people a chance to look behind the curtain so that you can see this is how Jehovah's Witnesses actually feel. This is how they would actually respond if you pose to them these type of critical thinking questions. As we're going to do in this forum, as we continue to develop this forum, we're going to give people questions. In fact, we'll tell you, ask the next Jehovah's Witness that you talk to about this. If you have a coworker, ask them. You have a neighbor, ask them. You have a cousin, uncle, ask them. And then observe how they respond. And what you will find is many times because people simply don't know what questions to ask. And that's what our forum is about. Critical thinking questions. What can I ask when a Jehovah's Witness says something to me? Well, most people don't know. And Jehovah's Witnesses take full advantage of that because people don't know anything about the organization. And so this is what really makes it so important for all former Jehovah's Witnesses to share their story. Anyone who has been touched by this religion, they got a story to tell. And regardless of whatever responsibilities or whatever we did in this organization, whether it was publishers, pioneers, else, whatever, every single person has a story to tell. And this is what critical thinking is all about. Now, keep in mind, as Jehovah's Witnesses, we often live literally by two sets of scales. We would apply one rule to those outside the organization, and then we would apply another rule to those inside the organization. As a critical thinker, when you read a quote like this, why can't this apply to everybody?
In the 1958 Watchtower, they talk about how the Irish do little independent thinking because of the influence of the church. Fear has a great hold on the people. People are afraid of what their neighbors, their friends, relatives, and clergy might think if they were even so much as to read the Bible on their own. For centuries, the clergy have dominated their lives, told them what they can read, what they should believe and do. To ask a sound religious question is a demonstration of a lack of faith in God and the church, according to the clergy. As a result, the Irish people do very little independent thinking. They are victims of the clergy and fear, but freedom is in sight. You know, it's amazing how the Watchtower actually printed this in their magazine back in 1958. And as you can aptly see, they no longer believe in that statement, because fast forward to 2017 and the Watchtower does not recommend that their members do any independent thinking.
So, as we mentioned before, why do some people attack the messenger and not the message? Well, we see the reason why. They're simply unable to defend what they actually believe. And this has been JT with The Critical Thought. Thanks for tuning in.
You can reach us at ExJWCT@gmail.com. This has been Lady C. Thank you for tuning in.
This program was sponsored by Critical Thinkers.